The Galactic Council had always prided itself on order. For millennia, they categorized civilizations, assigned them rankings, and ensured the galaxy remained stable under their careful oversight. Every species was analyzed, classified, and placed within the hierarchy. Then came the humans. At first, they were insignificant, a minor species from a small, unremarkable planet. A place classified as a Deathworld, but no more than a Class 4. Harsh, certainly, but survivable. The Council took little notice. Until the reports started coming in. The first sign was their endurance. Other species required controlled environments, specialized suits, and strict conditions to function off-world. Humans? They adapted. Extreme temperatures, low oxygen, radiation exposure, things that would incapacitate most beings were inconveniences at best to them. They didn't just survive, they thrived. The second warning came with their biology. Rapid healing, high pain tolerance, an immune system that treated foreign environments as challenges rather than threats. A species that suffered broken bones and kept moving. That endured injury and fought harder. That could lose parts of itself and still function. The third, and most alarming, was their mindset. Most species had limits, psychological, emotional, instinctual barriers that dictated their behavior. Not humans. Their capacity for risk, their unpredictability, their sheer refusal to surrender defied logic. Where others retreated, they advanced. Where others hesitated, they acted. They learned from failure at an alarming rate, treating loss not as defeat but as a lesson. By the time the Council realized the implications, it was too late. Their scientists ran the calculations. Their analysts reviewed the data. And what they found changed everything. Humans did not belong in their initial classification. They weren't just another minor species. They were a galactic anomaly. The Council's reclassification efforts were slow, burdened by bureaucracy. But the numbers didn't lie. The scale shifted. Class 6. Then 8. Then 10. Each reassessment brought further unease. The Deathworld scale measured danger. A Class 10 species was rare. A Class 12 unheard of. But the projections didn't stop there. And then, it happened. The final report. The undeniable proof. The moment the Council had to accept what they feared most. Humans had officially surpassed every known limit. Class 14. The Council chambers erupted into chaos. Species that had considered themselves apex predators reeled at the implications. The room filled with hurried whispers, desperate reassurances, futile denials. No civilization had ever been ranked that high. It wasn't just a warning, it was an existential crisis. The very foundation of the Council's authority relied on control. But how do you control a species that refuses to be contained? How do you negotiate with beings that see the impossible as a challenge? That adapt faster than policy, learn faster than law, and refuse to acknowledge the limits imposed upon them? There was no precedent. No strategy. No defense against the unknown. And so, for the first time in its long, calculated history, the Galactic Council felt something entirely new. Fear. The Council convened in emergency session, an event so rare that it had only occurred a handful of times in galactic history. The chamber, normally a place of calm deliberation, was now filled with unease. Every representative present understood the gravity of the situation. A Class 14 species was not just a threat, it was a catastrophe waiting to unfold. The discussions were frantic. Some argued for containment, restrict human expansion, impose trade embargoes, limit their access to advanced technology. Others proposed diplomacy, desperate to establish treaties before humanity's unpredictable nature turned them against the galaxy at large. A few, the most fearful, suggested more drastic measures. Preemptive strikes. Subjugation. Even extermination. But none of the options provided a real solution. Containment had already failed, humans were everywhere, integrating, adapting, pushing boundaries no matter the limitations placed on them. Diplomacy was unreliable. How do you negotiate with a species that thrived in conflict? And as for extermination, that idea was dismissed almost as quickly as it was suggested. Every simulation, every strategic model, pointed to the same conclusion. An open war against humanity wouldn't be a battle. It would be a disaster. The Council had studied the patterns of war throughout the galaxy. Conflicts were predictable. Factions fought over resources, power, or ideology. But humans didn't wage war for the same reasons. They fought when cornered. They fought when challenged. They fought because, to them, struggle was a part of existence. And worst of all, they didn't just fight to win. They fought to break their enemy's will. The Council had already seen the signs. Their trade restrictions had backfired. Humans found alternative solutions, building industries from scraps. Sanctions meant nothing when a species could survive on nearly any planet, in nearly any condition. Even direct military engagements with smaller galactic factions had proven terrifyingly effective. Human forces didn't fight by conventional rules. They exploited weaknesses, thought laterally, turned their own disadvantages into strengths. One incident stood out: a skirmish between a human colony and an aggressive expansionist species. The opposing fleet had superior numbers, superior firepower, and complete orbital control. Standard doctrine dictated surrender. The humans responded by sabotaging their own oxygen supply, igniting the atmosphere, and turning the entire battlefield into a death trap. They lost, but they took the enemy with them. It wasn't strategy. It was sheer, unrelenting defiance. The Council realized too late that humanity's classification wasn't a warning to others, it was a warning to themselves. They had underestimated what it meant to label an entire species as a Deathworld entity. It was not just their environment that was dangerous. It was them. The discussion turned to solutions, but the underlying truth was clear. There was no stopping them. No controlling them. No predicting them. And so the Council, for all its power, was left with only one question. What happens when an uncontrollable force refuses to be governed? The decision was made. The Council would test humanity, not through diplomacy, not through sanctions, but through force. A demonstration of power. A decisive strike to remind them of their place. The target was chosen carefully: an outer human colony, lightly defended, isolated from reinforcements. A show of dominance, swift and overwhelming. The assembled fleet was vast, a coalition of species united in their determination to send a message. The humans would understand. They had to. The attack began with orbital bombardment. Standard protocol. Reduce resistance before deployment. The colony's defenses crumbled quickly. No shields. No planetary guns. No real military presence. It should have been over in minutes. But then the resistance began. Not from warships or battle-hardened soldiers, but from civilians. Untrained, outgunned, surrounded. And yet, they fought. Improvised weapons, repurposed machinery, guerrilla tactics that no structured military would ever consider. They turned factories into strongholds, pipelines into traps, mining equipment into weapons. Every street, every ruined building became a battlefield. The fleet's ground forces advanced, expecting surrender. Instead, they found ambushes. Bombs hidden in wreckage. Snipers concealed where no life should exist. Attack patterns that made no sense, yet tore through their ranks with horrifying efficiency. It was chaos. Not war, but something far worse. The humans didn't fight for territory or victory. They fought to make every step forward cost more than it was worth. They fought without fear, without hesitation, without mercy. And then came the real horror. They adapted. Faster than any species the Council had ever encountered. Each failed assault only taught them how to counter the next. Each loss only made them more efficient. Strategies that worked one hour became obsolete the next. The Council's forces, trained in structure and discipline, struggled to respond. Humanity had no structure. Their discipline was in their chaos. Reinforcements were called. More ships, more troops. But it didn't matter. The colony should have fallen within hours. Instead, days passed. Then weeks. Casualties mounted. Morale collapsed. The Council fleet, superior in every way, found itself locked in a war it could not win. And then, the final blow. A single human transmission, broadcast across all channels. Calm. Precise. Unshaken. You should have talked to us. Moments later, human warships emerged from the void. Not an armada, not a grand fleet, just a handful of vessels outdated by galactic standards, but terrifyingly effective. They didn't attack the Council's fleet directly. They didn't need to. Instead, they targeted supply lines, disrupted communications, turned the battlefield into an unsustainable mess. The Council's carefully planned operation collapsed under its own weight. The order was given. Retreat. The message was clear. The war wasn't over. It had never even begun. Because humanity had just proven what the Council feared most. They weren't a species that needed to be controlled. They were a species that refused to lose. The Council's fleet limped back to their respective territories, battered and humiliated. What was meant to be a decisive display of dominance had become an undeniable failure. The losses were staggering, not just in ships or soldiers, but in something far more damaging. Fear had shifted. It was no longer the fear of an unknown threat. It was the fear of something understood too late. Humanity was not just dangerous. They were inevitable. The reclassification was no longer debated. It was finalized. A Class 14 Deathworld species, the highest designation ever recorded. A species that did not just endure, but adapted, evolved, and overcame. A species that had proven, beyond doubt, that war against them was not a battle. It was a lesson in futility. For the first time in galactic history, a new reality had to be accepted. Humanity could not be stopped. Not through force, not through diplomacy, not through restriction. The Council could impose sanctions, issue warnings, build fleets, and draft policies. It would change nothing. Because humans did what they always did. They survived. They learned. And they came back stronger. Some within the Council still clung to old ways of thinking, desperate for control. But the smarter ones, the ones who understood the truth, had already shifted their approach. If humanity could not be contained, they had to be embraced. Treaties were rewritten. Borders were adjusted. Trade agreements, once restrictive, were suddenly open. Not out of kindness. Not out of diplomacy. But out of necessity. Because if war had taught the Council anything, it was this: humanity was not their enemy. They were their future. Word spread across the galaxy. Once feared predators now treaded carefully. Empires that had lasted for millennia quietly adjusted policies to accommodate the inevitable rise of the newest power. And those who still saw humanity as a challenge, as something to be conquered, hesitated. Because they knew. Humanity was watching. And they were waiting.